Alright, so last week I put my Radeon RX 9070 XT into my recording PC, which consists of a 12400 F CPU and 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 megatransfers per second CL18 memory. I just wanted to test the recording quality, and then I thought maybe I should do a couple of benchmarks as well, just for those of you who are interested in maybe lower end CPUs and how their performance stacks when it comes to more modern GPUs, right? So the 12400 F6 core 12 thread CPU, and it has an all-core boost clock stock of around 4 gigahertz, as can be seen in the top left-hand corner there. And currently we are running at, let me show you, currently running at 1440p with the FSR native AA. Right, so FSR native AA, and then on the Ultra Nightmare preset, it does say custom. I don't know why it keeps on doing that. Maybe because I maxed out the texture pool size, but even if I set this to 2048, it still shows custom. But anyway, the Ultra Nightmare preset, and currently we are able to maintain, let me just refresh our numbers here, able to maintain around 90 frames per second. You can see we are fully GPU bound. Our GPU is using 333 watt, which is its max, right? And the GPU usage is sitting at 98%. It can go slightly, very so slightly higher, but we are basically fully GPU bound here. And the proof of that is if we then lower the resolution here by enabling FSR, we will then still see a little bit of an increase in the frame rate, right? So that means we're not fully CPU bound. And if we go ahead now, we were sitting at around 90 frames per second. Wow. All right, so we're going to 150 frames per second. So definitely not CPU bound previously. Now we might become a little bit more CPU bound. You can see our GPU usage is, GPU power is sitting at around 300 watts. So it's around 10% less than previously, which makes sense because the GPU doesn't need to work as hard because the internal render resolution is slightly lower. But I'm not going to be testing too much here. I just need to finish, and then we'll test 4K as well. I'll restart the map checkpoint. So I mean, just look at the lows there. 111 for the 1% low, 0.1% low, the 0.1% low sitting at 109. This is a very, very good experience. So, all right, let's move on to 4K quickly. Now, I just want to point out, I'm not doing full CPU testing. I'm not going to drop this down to 720p and whatever. The point of my testing is to switch it to 4K first. But the point of my testing is just to show you that you can actually get a decent enough experience with the lower end CPU. Yeah. All right, so now we're at 4K, still Ultra Nightmare, FSR native AA, and obviously, yeah, we're going to be more GPU bound. Let me just get our counter up here. Whoops, there we go. So around 40 to 50 frames per second at times, right? So it's not going to go down so well. So we will need to use FSR here. Once we get to a playable frame rate, I'm just going to restart the map, right? So FSR quality should be good enough here to get us to 60 frames per second at all times here. And there we go. So 77, restart map, and off we go. Now, I'm not going to advocate people to go out and buy this GPU. Why are we starting here? This is not what I had in mind when I selected restart checkpoint, right? Anyway, we can continue. So it's I'm not going to tell you to go buy this GPU, this CPU, if you've got this GPU, but I do know that there's a lot of people, especially in my comment section, that asks me about, you know, I've got a lower end CPU. Is it worth it to upgrade my GPU and until I can upgrade my CPU, kind of thing? And this is just to show you that, I mean, Doom is definitely okay with a lower end CPU. Yeah. And now that's not going to be true for every game, which we will see right now. We will actually test a few games, and I think that's enough for Doom. But just look at the CPU power here. We're sitting at 18 watts of CPU power on the 12400F. This game is exceptionally light on CPUs, and it is great to see. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so next up we've got Clair Obsur Expedition 33, and this is a weird one because you can see we are CPU bound. Our GPU usage is sitting at 80 something percent, right? 80-90%, and our GPU power is kind of low, 250 watt there, 260 watt there. But let me just show you the issue that I have with this game currently is that I can't select the resolution I want to, right? So currently we are on the high preset at 1080p. Okay, I have to select Epic scaling mode because this game doesn't have FSR, right? It's got TSR, XSS. That's basically it, right? So Epic is the only one that gives you 100% render resolution scale. I mean, you can do it with XSS as well, but we got 1080p here. Okay, this is a 4K capture card. Okay, and it's an Elgato capture card. But if I change this to 1440p and go ahead and apply, right? I laugh at it's going to work now. If it's going to work, I'll be very happy. No, it doesn't. It stays on 1080p. There's, even if I switch it to windowed, even borderless windowed, like whatever, if my current desktop resolution is 1440p, so borderless windowed should revert to 1440p, but it doesn't. Right, so unfortunately we have 1080p testing and 4K testing. That's all I can do here. I can select 4K, but I cannot select 1440p. All right, so CPU bound here, which is actually a pretty good test, right? We can see that the maximum our CPU is capable of in this game is basically 118, 120-ish frames per second. Now the enemies are gone, which is I don't know, something is a little bit strange here with my game at the moment. I just raced it before I started this benchmark run, and right, so if you raced the enemies respawn, right? So there we go. Now if we just want to show you what happens in battle, and if we then switch it to 4K, let me just reset our numbers here, so you can see the game runs pretty well. There are a few traversal stutters every now and again, and you'll see now when we go into battle, that transition phase, there's a bit of a stutter there, right? It's not the end of the world. So if we go ahead and refresh our numbers, I'm not going to be doing very well in this battle, I think, because I can't really see much. All right, so let's just hopefully I don't spoil anything here for you guys, but I don't think so. I don't think so. If we then just do a few battles here, I'm not going to waste too much time. We'll switch to 4K just now. But you can see we are definitely a little bit more GP bound here in the battle section. We are 95, 97% GPU usage. So, but back here in the more open areas, we are CPU bound again. Now that obviously changes completely when we go over to 4K, which I'm going to attempt to do now. Okay, so let's go for 4K. I know I'm just selecting the high preset. The ultra preset is just a little bit too heavy in this game for my liking, and it's really not that big a difference. Okay, let's see if 4K works. 4K does not work. Oh, let's try borderless window. Let's see if it goes to 4K. I don't know. Let's see, the size of this thing could be 1440p now, depending on what we see. Actually, this is 1440p, 90-ish frames per second. That's definitely 1440p. So I'm guessing we are testing 1080p at 1440p. I'm not going to try and alt-tab out because then the scaling breaks again. I usually just alt-tab out to increase the on-screen display's size there, but it's not a good idea in this game. I cannot change the resolutions to what I wanted them to be. Now over here we are still above 60 frames per second, right? As you could see, there are quite a few stutters the moment you enter battle, but like because it's not happening during the battle, I don't think it's an issue. And this happens even on a 7800 X3D CPU, right? It's not unique to this. All right, I don't think I'm going to play too much here, but you can see definitely getting a decent experience here. 70-ish. Our average is 78 frames per second. I'm not going to be able to parry it. I'm playing on a, even though it's a 4K monitor that this thing is connected to, I do play on I monitor it through OBS on the external capture card PC, and the input latency is much higher. Okay, so I think that's going to be it for Clair Obsur. Actually, not a terrible experience either. Alright, so here we have Cyberpunk 2077, and although it does say custom preset. It's the high preset, but I just selected the upscaling quality manually, so that's why it says custom, and just everything on the high setting here, right? I do have all these options disabled, and so 1440p high preset native resolution, and this one actually works at 1440p. So let's just do all this. Oh, there we go. Let me just reset the numbers. It's kind of all right, there we go. So the numbers, it does stutter when I do reset the numbers, but here we go, 100 and something frames per second here. Cyberpunk is actually a pretty good game to test because it can be very GPU heavy and it also can be very CPU heavy. So the area we started in was quite GPU heavy, but now I'm running the specific route because over here it becomes very CPU heavy because of all the NPCs and stuff, right? And we're not we're running on the high preset, not even the ultra presets, so I do have fewer NPCs here, and you can see our GPU usage is sitting at 80-90%, but our GPU power draw is very low, right? So we are definitely CPU bound even at 1440p native resolution here, which we will basically show in 60-ish frames per second there. We'll show that by enabling upscaling, and the frame rate shouldn't increase that much in this specific spot, right? So let's just go ahead and enable upscaling actually. So let's just the FSR quality, right? Let me see if I can get the combo right this time. So first that and then that. Okay, so sure, we're getting 100 and something frames per second here, but it did drop into the 80s and 70s here as well. And it still does, right? The GPU usage went lower. Like it might be slightly better than previously, but we're definitely becoming CPU bound here. As you can see, our GPU usage is very low. Now GPU power is sitting at 80 watts, right? This GPU loves to draw up to 300 watts, so it really is very CPU limited here. And the only thing that you can actually do to get rid of the CPU bottleneck in this case is either to increase the resolution, or you can enable frame generation. Frame generation works best when you are CPU bound, and I think let's do that. We might have to just restart the game for frame generation to take effect, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so yeah, we are with frame generation, exactly the same settings, and we are getting around 200 each frames per second. Yeah, our GPU power is still in the 90s, right? It's very CPU limited still, but we are getting a, I'm not going to say a high refresh rate experience because we do not get the lower input latency by running frame generation at these higher frame rates, right? But you can see we are getting 200 something frames per second here, which basically the only thing you can do in this regard to increase your frame rate, seeing that you are CPU limited, you can get a, for example, a B760 Riptide motherboard that enables BCLK overclocking, and you can overclock this CPU even though it's an F model. You can get faster memory, that kind of stuff, but this is basically an in-game toggle, right, to increase your frame rate, and I think it does okay. Unfortunately, this game only supports FSR 3 frame generation, not 3.1 frame generation, and it shows the visuals in this game with FSR are quite bad. I personally prefer to play with XSS enabled here, but we do not have frame generation with XSS in this title, right? But you can see 194 frames per second as the average, pretty decent. Now I'm going to disable frame generation again, and then we'll test some ray tracing, because ray tracing can also put additional load on the CPU. And for that, we'll just enable ray tracing, and everything is enabled, and we use ultra ray trace lighting, right? And no frame generation currently, just FSR quality at 1440p. And this GPU actually does very well with ray tracing as well, which is great, right? It outperforms the 7900 XTX in this game with ray tracing. What? I don't think I did anything wrong. Okay, I actually did. So you're able to get above 60 frames per second pretty much all of the time. Unfortunately, when we get to this spot over here, it's going to drop below 60 like there. But it's because it's a CPU limit, right? It's not a GPU limit. And once again, frame generation can sort that out for you, and we'll actually see when we get to 4K, we should be fully GPU bound even with the 12400F, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to leave these exact same settings, right? Except for ray tracing. I'm going to use FSR quality, and then we're going to go to 4K. Yeah. All right. So we're back on the high preset here, just with FSR set to quality, no ray tracing, and also 4K. Right. I finally managed to get it working. I don't know what's happening with my 4K scaling at the moment. Something's not right here. Maybe I'll just have to reinstall the driver completely. All right, let's just see. Do we even need FSR here? Fuck. 120 frames per second here at 4K on high preset. I think this is actually a pretty good experience, right? This is on, I mean, it's not native, it's FSR set to quality, but 100 and something frames per second here. Getting our GPU usage finally up there into the 90s. I just want to test one thing, right? I'm going to just disable FSR quickly and just going to do native AA. I want to see if we are fully GPU bound. Then let me just reset the numbers. Right, so now we're getting 60 frames per second, 330 watt on the GPU. I want to test in this specific spot. Obviously, the CPU is not able to do more than what we saw earlier, right? 60-ish frames per second in some scenarios. So it's going to drop even if we are GPU bound. But this is actually a very good experience at 4K native. 60 frames per second average, right? It does drop below 60 every now and again, but really not often enough to be a concern, I think. If you're aiming for 60, this is definitely not terrible. Once again, I'm not saying go out and buy a 12400 if you've got a 9070 XT GPU. It's just, you know, it's good enough to hold you over until you do have enough money to buy a CPU if you are looking to upgrade your system, right? I'm just impressed by the 12400F here. So an average there of 61, 1% lows of 48, and our 0.1% lows of 44. Once again, sorry, the on-screen display numbers are slightly slower. It's slightly smaller. But it's because my scaling doesn't work, and every time I go back into Windows to adjust scaling and this kind of stuff, the resolution changes, and I don't know, something's not right here. All right, but 61-ish frames per second average. Pretty decent experience, I'd say. Now, if we want to actually do a ray tracing here at 4K, actually quite curious to see whether FSR quality gets us to 60 frames per second here at 4K. It doesn't feel like it. Nope. So 40, 47. I think performance, I mean, there's really not that big a difference between quality and balanced. All right, so FSR performance here, let's reset our numbers, which means internally it's rendering at 1080p, then it's upscaled to 4K, right? But we are still getting around 60 frames per second, so even with the ray tracing load, the CPU is enough to maintain 60-ish frames per second here with the 9070 XT. I know the GPU is not doing any heavy lifting. If a CPU is not able to prepare more than 60 frames per second, right, no amount of GPU power is going to assist the CPU in preparing to render more than 60 frames per second. That's not how it works. All right, so still a decent experience. I actually wouldn't mind playing like this, except maybe use XSS instead of FSR, because XSS definitely looks better in this game. All right, now it's time to move on to the next one. Okay, so here we have The Last of Us Part 2. Currently, it's the very high preset, except I manually enabled 16 times anisotropic filtering. Right, rest the settings are basically just the high preset or the max preset. 1440p, and we are using FSR 4 native AA, so no upscaling whatsoever. And FSR actually looks very good in this game. I did disable anti-lag too, because the frame times kind of feel weird sometimes with it enabled. All right, so let's just go ahead here. We are in downtown Seattle area. It is one of the better areas for me to test in, because it is quite heavy both on the CPU and on the GPU, and also it looks very good with the swaying grass, and it's actually a very good area to test the FSR or upscaling settings, right? So yeah, we have an average of 115 frames per second, 1% loads of 77, and 0.1% loads are taking a little bit of a hit here at 58, but I think it is to be expected. This area was identified as a problematic area when it comes to traversal by Digital Foundry. There have been a few patches since, and it did improve quite a lot, right? We don't see the big hitches, freezes, that kind of stuff here anymore. I never saw them on my own system, but a lot of people did. But over here, this is still a very good experience, even though we do get the 0.1% lows down to 61. It should normalize a little bit once you actually play the same area quite a bit, right? So 120 frames per second, the average, pretty decent, and we are basically fully GPU bound, bar 1 or 2%, right? So let's see if we can actually get a little bit of a higher frame rate by enabling upscaling here. Again, it might sound weird. Some people think that you will always get extra performance by enabling upscaling, but that's not always true. If you're CPU bound, it doesn't always help, right? All right, so FSR set to quality, we were getting 120-ish frames per second, and we're still getting around 120-ish frames per second. So we were basically borderline fully CPU bound, and now we are fully CPU bound. Okay, so it didn't gain much from using or from enabling upscaling here. The grass still looks plenty good. Like, I really do think FSR looks very good here. Now I just want to comment one thing. If the video looks a little bit choppy, the game is not choppy at all. It's just the recording. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes OBS just messes around a bit with the smoothness of my recordings. Okay, so if you then want a little bit of a higher frame rate, we can always enable frame generation. Yeah, we do have FSR frame generation. It's actually pretty good in this game as well. And you'll see black screen, sorry. We'll just, it's one of the few videos recently that I do record live as well. Okay, and by live recording, I mean I'm talking while I'm playing and not recording a voiceover. Okay, so we bumped that up from 120 frames per second to 220 frames per second. Remember, it's not going to double your frame rate all the time. You do have a better chance of it doubling your frame rate when you are fully CPU bound, which we kind of were, but there's still some overheads, right? Which is to be expected. But 220 frames per second, yeah, game feels perfectly fine. Unfortunately, I do not have an on-screen latency measurement for AMD. There is a separate app that you can use, and it will display the latency, but not on screen, right? Anyway, so 213 for the average, 112 for the 1% lows, and 75 0.1% lows. I think it's perfectly fine. Once again, definitely not missing out on too much here by pairing or with this pairing anyway. All right, I think let's just do 4K quickly. Then we have I don't think we should test any more games. I just wanted to test a bunch of modern games actually, just to see what the CPU can do with a modern GPU. That I think I pressed the right button there. All right, I did. So 4K, I'm just going to disable frame generation here, and also just going to disable upscaling. So it's just FSR native, but still on the maximum settings here. Let's just see, that's the right button. Want to see if we can get 60 frames per second here, and that's actually pretty good. We are. So 70, did I press the right buttons there? No, I did not. No, I did. Okay, so 70, maintaining around 70 frames per second here. GPU power is sitting at 330 watts, which is this GPU's max power usage without adjusting any power sliders. And I think that this is actually also a very good experience. Obviously, the higher resolution, the lower the frame rate, which means the less your CPU needs to prepare, because what happens is your GPU becomes the limiting factor, meaning the GPU can do 70 frames per second in this instance, right? Which means that the CPU only needs to prepare 70 frames per second. When the GPU can do 120 frames per second at lower resolutions, that means the CPU then needs to prepare 120 frames per second. And the higher the capabilities of the GPU, the higher end CPU you require, right? The faster the CPU needs to be able to prepare all the frames that the GPU requires to be 100% utilized. All right, I think that's going to be it, right? Just one more thing. I just want to see what happens if we actually just enable FSR frame generation. Yeah, or this is native. Okay, let's just do upscaling, quality upscaling. Okay, should look perfectly fine here at 4K. And I want to see what kind of frame rates we do get. All right, so now you can see we gained a little bit. We went from around 70 to around 90. So that's typically what would happen if you are GPU bound and you're able upscaling, whereas previously at 1440p we were CPU bound, so we did not see any increase in the frame rate by enabling upscaling. All right, I think that's going to be the end of this video. I just wanted to have a quick look at the 12400F's gaming performance when paired with a more higher end GPU. I call it a higher end GPU because it is the overall the fastest GPU from AMD at the moment when you take ray tracing into consideration as well. And I think it does pretty well, especially at higher resolutions, obviously. All right, that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And as always, we hope to see you in the next one.